We've got a panel joining us to talk for a little bit about how they're going to take this virtual recruitment cycle that they've been through and blend it into this hybrid for 2022 recruitment. And I'm very excited to have the panel with us. So joining us now, we have 4 members of the Capture family. We've got Dr. Eric Stokes. He's the Assistant Vice Provost of Strategic Enrollment Management at the University of Memphis. Mary Wagner, Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management and Executive Director of Admissions for the University of South Carolina. Colin Palmer, the Director of Admissions for the University of Toledo. And Caitlin Shear. Caitlin is the Director of Integrated Enrollment Marketing Communication at George Mason University. Man, you guys have some big, long titles to get me to spit out here. But thank you guys so much for joining.
It's so good to see your faces.
Great to be here.
Heather and I miss being able to go to campuses, so just let us know when we can come and visit.
Anytime.
Oh my gosh, you guys have fun.
Thanks, Heather. Well, let's jump right in because I have just so many questions for you guys today. Before we dig too much into the virtual events, there is another significant change that happened during this recruitment cycle that impacted your campuses. And that's the shift to being test optional for the year. And many of our campuses went test optional. Just wanted to pick your brains for a minute. If you went this route, can you share insights on how it impacted your incoming class? GPA, test score averages, total applicants, any details that you've noticed at this point in time in the cycle. Eric, do you have any insight on that for your campus?
Sure. Lauren, thank you for having us. Greetings to the rest of the panel. I'm privileged to be here with you fine people, and welcome to everybody out there in cyber world. To get to your question, I'll try to be brief. Yes, it had a huge impact on our admission this year. We were able to admit over 3,500 students without an ACT or an SAT score. And so these are generally students who we may not have admitted in the past if we stuck only to ACT scores. So it really increased our admit pool. In fact, our largest admit class that we've had. So we had a great admission pool to choose from, and not at the detriment of our academic profile. We were able to maintain our profiling. In fact, we actually increased our GPA by 1 point. So that was great to hear. So hopefully we'll see that impacted yield positively as well. So we're hopeful in that sense, because typically, like I said, some of these students we may not have admitted in the past. And so we're hoping to have great results there.
Mary, what about at the University of South Carolina? Any insights into your class? Oh, we can't hear you, Mary. Nope. I'll tell you what, while Mary troubleshoots, Colin, do you have any insight from Toledo?
Sure. So like Eric at Memphis last year, we did see a slight increase in our profile, even with implementing Ohio's first public university test optional admission policy. So far this year, I just ran the numbers yesterday, about 56.5% of our entering class of 2021 has applied without test scores. So I don't know if that was lower or higher than I anticipated, or perhaps, right in line with what we thought it might be, but it looks like just a little over half for next year. And we've decided to make that a permanent policy moving forward, because it's worked out for us so well so far.
Fantastic. Mary, can we hear you now?
How about now?
Yeah.
Well, again, thank you for having me. And like I think most institutions, if you weren't test optional before and you went test optional for the first time, like we did this past year, we definitely saw a lift. What we saw was because so many of the testing patterns were a little bit staggered, and we get applications from students in different regions of the country. We saw that, depending on what was going on locally, that might impact when people would apply. So I think when we were kind of moving in to the first deadline that we have, which is our non-binding early action around mid-October, things were kind of lagging and people were waiting until the last minute. But then everybody decided, they would apply at the last minute for the December 1 deadline. And I think a lot of students, just because they may have wanted to apply with test scores if they could, They knew they didn't have to, but a lot of them kind of held out to see if they would have access to testing and then would make their decision to apply test optional or not at that point. And like other institutions, we had a record number of applications. We had, I'd say about 40% of the students, didn't submit test scores, and we had about 42,000 applications this year. But we didn't see a significant difference in yield between test optional students and those who submitted test scores. And so a lot of that may have to do with, we get a lot of our applications from out of state also. So distance from home and cost of attendance and things like that are, probably some factors there as well. But those are some of the things that we observed that kind of changed up our operations this year.
Caitlin, any other insights from George Mason?
Well, Mason was in a unique position. I've been at Mason over 10 years, and we were score optional before I came onto the scene. And so it didn't really have a huge impact. I know we had been accommodating applications without scores for many, many years in our holistic review process. And so I know we had more applications from Virginia, but I'm not sure that it was related to the fact that we're score optional.
Show of hands, who's remaining test optional for 2022 recruitment? All right. Seems to be pretty standard. What about, can anyone speak to how this has changed your application review process? Or is there anything you've learned this year that helped you streamline to be more prepared to review all those applications for 2022?
Well, I can start. It certainly pushed us to think a little bit more outside the traditional norms. We always have done holistic review, kind of the way Caitlin said, but we haven't been as robust as we had to do this year because not having that test score factor. And so we had to look at other means. Our admissions process is built on kind of expedited review. That's kind of the competitive advantage we try to have. And so we had to think about how can we continue to review students and try to maintain that accelerated decision-making process. And so what we had to do was look at creating a questionnaire. So we created a supplemental review questionnaire, kind of built on the framework of Selichek's non-cognitive variables as kind of a foundation for that. And so that allowed us to capture more information that we normally don't ask on our application for some students. And so that helped us with an additional review process. And then also for merit scholarships, we did a similar process in terms of creating a questionnaire, as well as we had to rethink for our English and math placement. Some of our faculty were very stuck in, tied to test scores and placement. And so we had to get them to try to think about how we can think about other ways that we can place students. So we came up with some alternative means of placement there. And so that was something really good. And I think all of those processes will continue for next year with a few reflection and revision with them.
Great. Let's jump in and talk about virtual events, because I know that's the reason why a lot of our listeners are here today. First of all, my first question, and Caitlin, if you want to go first with this one, when it comes to virtual events, what setup proved to have the best conversions on applicants or yield for your campus?
Well, obviously, we're still calculating. Our admitted or deposited students are just signing up for orientation now. So many of those calculations are still being done, but the strategy for virtual events really took off, and everybody had to pivot so quickly. But we have seen the attendance be nearly what an in-person event would have been for our big yield events last spring and this spring, and so it's been very successful. So I'd say moving forward, the fall strategy is not to try to blend, but to basically do both and have opportunities both in person and virtually for students to get to know Mason. I assume everybody else has something similar on their campuses.
Absolutely. Colin, when it comes to the setup of events for Toledo, did you notice a difference in conversion between large group sessions, smaller regional sessions? What did you guys play around with within metrics to decide what worked best for your campus?
Sure. So in spring of 2020, when we first started offering virtual events, we saw attendance and registration for those increase from students outside of the Midwest. I think a lot of institutions saw students from further away, join because those opportunities were available. And so we found that focusing invitations and sessions on students in certain geographic regions to be very helpful. So at the University of Toledo, a regional Midwestern institution, we had 15 students attend our Florida and Georgia event. For us, we were so excited about that. And it's interesting, we were one of the early institutions to bring on-campus visits back in 2020. And that those students from further away, that attendance transitioned from virtual events into in-person events, and that was very exciting for us. At a spring event, we had 15 states represented at one of them, and that was quite a large success for us. So I would say that the smaller regionally based or academic based events for us were more successful than a large virtual open house. But again, because we were able to bring on campus events, we used our virtual events to kind of complement that rather than replace those.
We heard earlier from Jacksonville University that the pre-recorded sessions and being able to play those on demand really helped them with recruiting in the graduate market. Mary or Eric, any insight into how pre-recorded versus live events worked for your campuses?
Yeah, I'll talk about that because we really did make heavy use of Platform Q this year, and we had never used it before, and we used it for a general open house event in the fall, as well as admitted student events in the spring. And so, by almost doing more just-in-time messaging around this is what's going to be going on this week and providing reminders of what is going to happen on each night, rather than trying to jam it all in one day, kind of breaking it up into more digestible, smaller pieces, and then just kind of reminding people of what they may have missed in the past week and that they could go back and look at stuff, seemed to be very successful for us. So we just know that our own time is very fragmented, and we can only imagine what that's like for students. And so trying to be, responsive to, I think what we've all kind of come to expect is, okay, I'd really like to go and see that thing, but I know it's being recorded, so I'll go back and watch it on my own time. But you also don't want it to take an hour and a half to get all the content that you want, letting people know that you've got those little snippets of all those different topics and that they can go back and watch this on demand. Really just helped us get a lot of traction and get a lot more exposure rather than just doing it right at the moment that they were available to meet with us.
Awesome. Eric, how did the University of Memphis handle pre-recorded versus live events?
Yeah, the same as kind of what everybody else said. I'll just kind of reiterate really what Mary mentioned about the after the fact watching them on demand. At first, we were a little freaked out when we didn't see those attendance numbers kind of jump up where we wanted them for some of the virtual events. And we tried to do most of our virtual events live, but we record them and then would put them in content for later review. And we noticed that people were still viewing that content, not just students, but parents too. And so that kind of helped us to kind of ease our minds and know that people just want to. It made a strong case for offering a diverse array of methods for students to engage with us, students and families, because some want to do it live, some want to do it on their own time, some want to do it before they come to a campus visit, some do it after a campus visit. So we'll, as Caitlin mentioned, kind of use a blended version of all those kind of things for the fall semester. And really just to add, what worked really well with us too were the one-on-ones with our admissions counselors. Students seem to really want to sign up for one-on-ones, which we hadn't been doing in pre-pandemic. And so that's something we'll definitely want to keep post-pandemic.
So what about the admissions-led versus faculty-led sessions? Did you guys experiment with faculty-led sessions, and did you learn anything from those about program-specific events in the future?
Go ahead, Caitlin.
I was just going to say, I don't know that we had faculty-led. We had faculty participating and then staff from the colleges, but certainly it worked for us to get the colleges in front of the students earlier in the funnel than we might have in a particular year. And so to do early events in the fall that allowed a piggyback event onto a larger event, allowed the college to get the attendance that they wanted. And so these breakout and niches often had current students and faculty as part of it. And they were all live, but, taped for, later viewing. But we also grouped events around a particular theme, like certain majors or campus experiences around global education or social justice, to allow some smaller programs to cluster efforts. And that worked really well.
Mary, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we all know that some faculty are probably more adept at this, being up front than others. You just kind of hold your breath and you don't know what they're going to say. And so having the ability to kind of pre-record content and then either, put it in some sort of a platform that people can go back and watch that, or have it presented in tandem with a live event, like some sort of a chat event or, a panel and all, can be really, really helpful because they can practice and you can get it just right.
Awesome.
It's always good to prep your faculty in advance, be selective in who you choose. A lot of people want to help, but not everybody's great for these things.
Okay, so travel is back this fall, maybe a little modified from what it has been in the past, but now we're in the conundrum of we had so many virtual events and they did do well, and now we've got to get our admissions counselors back out on the road. I want to hear from each of you on this situation. How are you handling this balance of needing to host these events and needing to have that live time in the field? And Colin, you want to start us off with this?
Well, I don't think that I have that completely figured out yet, just because, in Ohio, we just announced last year that our ACAC will be sponsoring in-person college fairs. NACAC is not hosting in-person fairs in the fall. I mean, there's just the constant changes and how that's going to look. I think that, at least from my perspective, all of us will recognize the need to have both in-person and virtual events at every stage in the funnel moving forward. I certainly hope, for the sake of our staff here, but also the students and influencers that we hope to connect with, that we won't have to have them at quite the rate or length that we may have done over the past year. But I do hope that what our hope is, if we're connecting with a student online, or even if we're connecting with a student at a regional event in Cincinnati or Detroit or wherever, the ultimate hope is that they'll make the investment in visiting campus and visiting the university. So I think as long as we keep the information sharing and the affinity building, second to driving that campus visit and that real connection point, that would probably help lead our strategy moving forward.
Caitlin, what about George Mason?
I mean, I think it's the same. It's a delicate balance. I know the admissions office is looking at their travel now and trying to plan. I mean, virtual events and virtual tour opportunities are just an important part of our access mission too. Not everybody can afford to come to campus. And so it's something that would always stay part of our portfolio for the students that we're serving.
Mary, do you anticipate continuing to use the same pre-recorded sessions, or will you guys push out more or different versions of the sessions for this recruitment cycle?
I think that remains to be seen. We'll want to go back and look at the content to see whether or not it's dated, and so we'll certainly do that. But I think virtual is going to be a part of the grand plan for the indefinite future. I mean, I just knowing that you are able to reach so many people at different time zones, like just one of the anecdotes that I found to be pretty impressive. We held an event that was actually a live chat event. I think we may have even done it on Zoom, but we advertised it and we emailed people on the West Coast about it, and we did it a little bit later for us, but local time was going to be around 7:00 West Coast time, and so we had people stay up late to work the chat, and we had people on the East Coast show up for that event, which just tells you that students are doing stuff at odd hours of the day, and if you're available when they're available, they will show up. So I think that that sort of thing, there's going to be that expectation that having that kind of on-demand real interaction, even if it's virtual, that students like it.
Yeah.
Eric, any other insight from the University of Memphis?
I agree with everything everybody else said, so I won't piggyback on all that. But I think that on-demand content, it's going to be a arms race, if you will, of who can create the best content, the most engaging content. And I think students are going to look to see new stuff when they come back. So I think it will push admissions offices to be nimble in what we create out there.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this breakdown of virtual visits versus on-campus visits. I know everyone on this call had a different policy for when they were allowed to bring visitors to campus and how large those groups could be. And you probably have a larger pool than ever before that hasn't actually set foot on campus and has done everything virtual. Tell me a little bit about that breakdown of your class, and not just percentage-wise who's been to campus and who hasn't, but how are you taking that virtual visit into calculations for predictions for your class this fall?
Well, we didn't know what the impact was going to be this year because it was the first year we've ever had to do the two, but we definitely saw some differences between people who were virtual only or in-person only, and then the people who had both. And if somebody went out of their way to do both, that's a pretty engaged student. And we did see a higher rate of yield on those students. But we also got a pretty significant number of people who, never participated in any of those things that we know of, right? They may have been able to, find another way or attend, on a parent's desktop or something like that. Maybe they weren't tracked in some way and all. But I think that, those things will definitely come into play when we look at next year. But we also expect that things will, hopefully we'll have more people come to campus. But I think for some of these virtual kids, we still had a pretty good yield on people who participated in virtual only stuff. And for people who are farther afield, I think people are going to be comfortable, using that as a way to get to know a campus if they really want to go there.
Caitlin, what about from George Mason?
No, I think that's true. And, we had lifted a virtual experience page in the spring of 20 that wasn't just limited. Obviously, we have a tour through UVisit, but was really a curated page of content that changed frequently so that, you could go back and it had spotlights of students and faculty and just all the kinds of things that we were imagining students would want to see, particularly from our student vloggers. Hearing directly from the student in a vlog got tremendous traction. And so that will continue to be part of the overall virtual visit strategy.
Great. Colin, what about you guys in Toledo?
I feel like we've touched on a lot of it. I know engaging current students with prospective students in more than just a virtual student panel seemed to be a bit challenging. And so we did really try to invest in in creating our own social media influencers at the university, and just trying to connect those students through our class of 2025 Facebook groups and any number of things. And so those were some ways we just tried to build those connections, and also just to keep parents and influencers engaged and involved digitally in those spaces that didn't necessarily require logging into a session at a certain time or watching something pre-recorded. Those were a large part of our yield efforts, especially.
I want to talk about those influencers in just a second. Before we leave virtual events overall, what was your favorite virtual event that your campus hosted this year, and why was it your favorite? Eric, you want to go first?
I knew you were going to start with me. Yeah. I don't know if it's my favorite so much, but I was really shocked and surprised. I guess you could say my favorite was we did a series of alumni hosted events based on career fields. So like law and industry or business, STEM, technology, education. And we had the best alumni that signed up, everything from first year teachers to principals that were all alums of Memphis, attorneys, everything you can think of, federal, state, private industry. And we had a great response from students and families. It was great engagement. They asked a lot of questions. I was excited about them in the beginning, like, oh, this is great. It's a great way to engage alumni and yada, yada, yada. But not knowing what the response would be, I was really impressed with that. And so that's something we'll continue, and we'll see how that goes.
Caitlin, what was your favorite at GMU?
I think it was the large spring yield events. We did the same thing. The admissions events team did the same thing that Mary mentioned at University of South Carolina. They broke it up into 3 days. And so that helped, I think, target what students wanted to see and how to break it up to not have to absorb everything all at once. We saw that be very successful in terms of attendance. We also made an investment in the production value of what we were pre-recording and the packages that we were able to feature on that. So I know that made a big difference in how successful the event was.
Colin?
Yeah, we've traditionally hosted an invitation-only scholarship competition for students early in the spring, typically around late January, early February. This year we hosted that in person, but also hosted it virtually. And that was such a unique experience. It was broken up by academic college. And so being in each college's session, and, typically the College of Engineering, we're the Rockets at the University of Toledo. So we like to have, rocket building competitions or something like that. But just seeing how they engaged with students and learned more about them and their experiences and kind of expectations of their collegiate experience, I think was just very enlightening for me, especially earlier on in the spring when we were still trying to figure out what the spring was going to look like, how were we going to, work through the rest of yield and things like that.
Awesome. Mary, what about South Carolina?
Well, a lot of the same similar types of events. We did our scholarship interviewing online. We did our admitted student day stuff online. But I think more than anything, what I've liked about admissions events is while all of us hated doing this shift to doing everything online, I was so, and we, of course, we're all planning things thinking like these kids are never going to show up. I mean, everyone's got to be Zoomed out. I'm dying over here on my side of the computer. How can they not be hired? And yet they showed. And so I was always pleasantly surprised and delighted by how engaged students were willing to be, because they're really, really, they're really serious about their future and they really want to set themselves up well. And so I'm really delighted by the resiliency of this particular class that had already just gone through so much and lost so much at the end of their junior year and didn't get to look at stuff over the summer. And they're like, all right, let's do this. And they did it. And so, and we helped them. And virtual, I think, is one of those things that all of us have wanted to dive down into. I mean, who did not go back and look at their online tour in a different way and think, wow, maybe this is not as good as it should be. We all went back and redid that. We all thought, like, I got some videos, but they ain't that great. I'm going to have to hire somebody to do it. We all did that.
Yeah.
And I think we just all ended up doubling down on the stuff that we've all have put on our wish list for years. And now we're like, all right, we're there. We're doing this.
So this environment gave us a time to invest extra dollars into video production. Caitlin, you guys said that you invested significantly in the production value of some of your pieces, but also this generation is very focused on the influencers and the live time video with low production value. Did you guys notice on your campus any preference between the student population on one type of event versus another?
I think we saw engagement with both.
Mm-hmm.
I really think that the videos that our student workers do as part of the vlog series are as valuable in a different way from the more highly produced marketing videos that we do. I think there's room for it all.
I think we have time for one more question, and I want to shift our focus over to the influencers that you all mentioned before. And advertising to this group has always been important to us, but I think now more than ever, we've really noticed that the parents and the counselors had a lot of influence, and the club leaders as well, over the class, and we missed out on that at some points during this past year. So this year we've seen a shift at Capture of more and more schools wanting to focus in on those influencers and hosting events and communicating with those groups specifically. At the inquiry generation level, or at very specific communication plans for parents and counselors, do you guys have plans for 2022 to make those an integrated part of your recruitment cycle, or are those plans still up in the air for you? Lots of nodding heads. Caitlin, how are you guys handling that group within your campus?
Sure. We had, for a number of years, had a counselor newsletter, and the admissions office had done a traditional counselor fly-in event on campus, which they did virtually. So those will certainly continue, likely in both versions. We also took another look at our parent plan, specifically in yield, to address some of the pain points, understanding the financial aid package, understanding the bill, understanding the process, and what, the next steps that students have to take once they're admitted. And so we definitely augmented our parent plan in that way for the kinds of students that we serve. We serve a lot of first generation, and so it was definitely helpful to add to that plan.
What about a breakdown between email communication with parents versus hosted events? Does anyone have any insight onto their campus's preference or how they'll be dividing it up for this incoming class?
Well, I think getting parents on board is definitely a strategy. I mean, they're paid for it more often than not, and they're pretty entitled to getting a lot of firsthand information. And so we would see a lot of times events that were designed for students, parents would show up for them. So I don't think that that's ever going to go away anytime soon.
Mm-hmm. Eric, did you have something to add there, or Colin does?
Go ahead, Eric.
Go ahead, Colin. Okay. I'll just say I was glad to hear what Caitlin was saying in terms of with counselors and parents and things like that. We actually had we didn't have a great turnout to our counselor on trying to engage with counselors just because they were so busy, particularly in the fall with everything going on in schools. And so they really they already don't have much time for us. And so events didn't go so well. So we'll have to think about other ways to engage our school counselors, because that was kind of a struggle for us, because a lot of our schools in our area have been virtual for so long. And so we're looking forward to try to get back to some changes this fall. But that was the area we struggled in, was engaging school counselors.
Yeah.
I know a lot of our conversations with parents and guardians, especially for next year, is going to be talking about the health of their student comprehensively, their academic health, social and emotional health, physical health, and focusing a little bit more on that and how that means more than just succeeding in the classroom and staying well when living in a residence hall, but just more comprehensively their health, which obviously supports their persistence and graduation.
Yeah, that's definitely been a significant shift in focus from families this year that we've noticed too. Well, I thank you guys so much for joining us today. I can't believe we're already out of time. But I really do appreciate each one of you guys coming in and speaking to our group today. I'm sure we probably have some questions floating out there on all of our live platforms, and we may have to gather the group back up in not too long for some additional conversations. But thank you guys so much. Heather's back with us. Hey, Heather.
Hey. That was fantastic.
Thanks, everybody.
Every time we get the opportunity to talk with folks like you and other enrollment and marketing professionals, reflecting on the last 18 months, the staggering amount of creativity, right, that is really born out of this moment where the normal toolbox was tucked away into a drawer from the pandemic. Never ceases to amaze me what you all have done on your campuses and for your prospective students and their families is impressive and awe-inspiring. So thank you so much for hanging out with us. Caitlin, Colin, Eric, Mary, you're the best. You're the best.
Thank you.
Thank you all.